Happy Devil's Tuesday. This is At the Point. I'm your host, Sam Wu, here with Bruce Zeman, streaming live on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, X Live, and Twitch on the Let's Go Devils Network. Talking NHL hockey over the wire in about 15 minutes ago. Jim Montgomery out as Bruins head coach. Unfortunately fired today. Joe Sacco, interim head coach, has replaced him. Bruce, this just coming over the wire about 15 minutes ago. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's a pretty big story. I mean, the Bruins off to really not a very good start, 8-9-3, and some of the things that they did in the offseason, bringing in Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov, and, of course, signing Jeremy Swayman to that huge extension. I did not think Montgomery would be one of the first coaches fired. However, the Bruins GM Don Sweeney decided to go in a different direction. Joe Sacco is going to be taking over on an interim basis. It's his 11th season behind the bench, and I think this might be a little bit of an overreaction, but the Bruins have decided to go in a different direction, and we'll see what comes out of this. That's pretty big news, though.
It's big news, especially when in his first season with the Boston Bruins, having that record-breaking season where I forgot how many points they had, 130? I forgot how it was was 140? I never forgot how many points that they had, but it was a record-breaking season nevertheless. Disappointment in the playoffs. They did get past the Toronto Maple Leafs to go to the second round. But even then, Jim Montgomery on the hot seat, slow start to this season, changes in personnel. I think it's a little bit over, that reaction was just a little bit, I don't know. Did they see something, Don Sweeney, did they see something in the locker room that would have triggered this type of move? I don't know.
Well, my thoughts on this are that this could possibly be a move by Don Sweeney to save his own job. I mean, he's been at the helm for a while now. And again, it was under his watch at the Bruins and under Montgomery's watch, if we're being fair, that the Bruins had that just cataclysmic collapse against the Panthers in the first round of the playoffs. And there were some voices saying that it might be time from the Bruins to move on from Don Sweeney. And so maybe this is a move by him. You'll never know, to try to save his own job. I mean, Montgomery was 120, 41, and 23 with the Bruins. I mean, those type of credentials don't really grow on trees. However, I mean, if we're being honest, that collapse, I don't really think the Bruins really ever recovered from that collapse against Florida under Montgomery. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Are you talking about 2 seasons ago?
I am.
Yeah,
I am. I'm talking about 2 seasons ago.
You want to know something about that Game 5? If you go back to the replay, that Game 5, and kids that play hockey should understand this on that play. Pavel Zacha was on the ice, I believe, and should have been back-checking that play that led to that goal, if I remember correctly. There were the little things that weren't done may have changed and altered hockey history there, because the Panthers were down in the first round against the big, bad Boston Bruins. Remember the dynamics. Remember what at that moment was. You had the Boston Bruins here, and if you look at my hand, like record-breaking regular season, and you had the Florida Panthers team that was just squeaking in to the postseason barely. And we're talking about barely in the end there. They got called out by Matthew Tkachuk's father, Keith Tkachuk, who I loved when he played in the NHL, about being too soft. And somehow the Florida Panthers in that Game 5 and the Boston Bruins had all the momentum, somehow squeaked out a win to extend the series to a Game 6, which history has it, Florida Panthers come back and take the series. That kind of momentum shift, and then going into the next season, which They just got by the Toronto Maple Leafs. I mean, the Maple Leafs had a 1-0 lead in that third period, Game 7 in Boston. Somehow the Bruins got by, and you would think that they would have had that momentum and have full speed ahead for the second round, but they got knocked out. It's amazing how things changed.
Well, again, if you look at that series too, if Brad Marchand scores, I think it's in Game 6. I think if he scores, that series is over. So there's so many things, but there's a number of things to look at here. You don't know what's going on in the room. Maybe Don Sweeney heard some stuff from the players that he didn't like. I have to say that as someone that played this game for a long time, not at this level, of course, but when that story came out a couple of weeks ago about Jim Montgomery screaming at Brad Marchand, I certainly didn't think. I thought things were starting to come. The wheels were starting to come off the bus a little bit when that got out, and you wondered if he lost the room. I mean, that's another thing. As analysts, we don't know. I mean, did he lose the room, regardless of his record? Is because you can't have a coach that's lost the room.
Yeah, and maybe there's still time in this NHL season. Right now, they're below NHL 500 right now, and there's a lot of money on the line. There's a lot of butts, they're on the hot seat, like Don Sweeney right now. You got to tell the Jacobs family, hey, you know what? We're going to do this. Here's why, and maybe that will jumpstart their season. I don't know. I don't know if this is the right move. Maybe sometimes a fresh voice in the locker room is good, but, I thought Jim Montgomery had a really good run there in Boston. And he is going to, no question, he can find a job immediately.
Well, I'll tell you an interesting story as I was getting ready for our show. Now, this is a rumor. This is not verified by anyone. This is just something that I heard floated earlier this afternoon. So this came across the NHL wire at 4:26 this afternoon on NHL.com that Montgomery was out. At 4:40, I heard a rumor that, and again, it's a rumor. It's not substantiated by anything. Wondering if the Montreal Canadiens could be interested in Jim Montgomery because he's bilingual. And is it a possibility that maybe they need another voice there? So who knows? This is such a crazy sport. And when these things happen, I mean, you're right. I think that Jim Montgomery will have another job by Christmas.
You think? Another coach that could be on the hot seat right now, that a team that needs a jumpstart, are the Nashville Predators. Andrew Brunette, coming from the New Jersey Devils, had a successful first season with this new club. They spent a lot of money, specifically Stamkos, to upgrade their lineup. Not so stellar start to this NHL season. You got to think that Barry Trotz is on the hot seat a little bit. But could it be possible that there could be a coaching change in Nashville? Because what we're seeing right now, it is a results-oriented business. You could have a lot of success, but the longevity of a head coaching job in the NHL, well, it's what have you done for me lately? And right now, Nashville is staring at that possibility, potentially.
I actually thought that Brunette would get fired before Jim Montgomery. I mean, I kind of thought Montgomery might be on the hot seat, but I'm a little surprised by this. But again, you're right. I mean, Nashville coming into tonight is 6-10-3. They're in 7th in the Central, 15th in the conference, and right now, on November 19th, they're 10 points out of a wild card spot. That's not good. And Barry Trotz has said in a couple of interviews that if things don't shape up, they're going to start their rebuild now. Well, what does that rebuild include? I mean, we talked about this in our last podcast. I mean, Steven Stamkos taking some time to get adjusted to Nashville. UC Saros, not really playing well. You've got Tommy Novak, Ryan O'Reilly, Roman Josi. So a whole bunch of things need to change there, and maybe it's time for a shakeup there. I'm a little bit surprised by the Bruins move. I really thought that something would happen in Nashville, or the other team that we're going to talk about in a minute. I really thought that something would happen potentially in Buffalo first.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Sabres were really expected to be a wild card team, or at least contend for a wild card spot in the Eastern Conference. I mean, they've got a bunch of decent players. I mean, Tage Thompson, a lot of talk about him breaking 100 points this year. Dylan Cousins, is he going to score 30 goals again? Jason Zucker, they've got on that team. They've got a new coach, Lindy Ruff. He was expected by a lot of people to be a Jack Adams finalist. I was not one of those people. And the team was thought to have a pretty good offense. They thought, a lot of people expected them to be one of the top 5 teams in the league in goals for. But, they're 8-9-1, 6th in the Atlantic, but they're only 2 points out of a wild card spot. So their GM, Kevin Adams, they are one of the teams that I have on my radar as to making a move. I'd heard rumblings that they're looking for a top 6 forward, but then again, what team in the league isn't, right?
Yep.
But, they've got potentially some goaltending issues, and, we'll see what happens there, too. I mean, if you were to ask me 2 teams that need to make moves to jumpstart their season, it's Nashville and Buffalo.
Yeah, but the Boston Bruins and the Buffalo Sabres, I mean, the Buffalo Sabres really needs to jump to start their season a little bit. There's still time for Buffalo, I would say. I mean, I think Lindy Ruff has a longer leash than
absolutely
than most, but it tells you how competitive the Eastern Conference, both the Atlantic and Metropolitan divisions. I mean, you're already making moves right now. If you're the Boston Bruins, I don't know what's how it is right now with the gate receipts. Was that maybe part? I don't know. I haven't looked at it yet, but here's the glaring stat right now: the regulation wins for the Boston Bruins, only 5. And
yeah, that's not going to.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. There's a little bit of a delay. That is not going to get you very far. And my biggest thing, having played, is that when I see this move, I'm wondering if the GM thought that he lost the room. That's really when I saw this, I said, well, that's might have been what happened, because I knew when he was screaming at Marchand and that story came out, because a lot of times teams will keep that. To me, I kind of wondered if that was almost leaked. I mean, you saw it on television. You saw him yelling at him, so you knew it wasn't. And Marchand, to his credit, said the right thing. He says, listen, we're all accountable, right?
Yep.
But, I mean, when you've got the head coach screaming at your star player and your captain, you kind of wonder if things have gone awry in the room.
Yeah. At the same time, they're all competitors. Again, who knows what the real reasons are with this, but it's just shocking to me that a head coach who, brought the team to the playoffs. I guess the expectations are much greater in Boston right now. That it's win now, and I can understand that. Lou Lamoriello has done that for many years, where he would change a coach on the fly, even with a few games left in the season. He's actually anointed himself as a head coach, and being behind the bench if necessary. But, right now, now here's the next question. Do you think this will jumpstart Boston?
I'm not sure that it'll jumpstart Boston, but I tell you what, the first name that jumps in my head, and when I see this, I don't think Joe Sacco is going to get that job. I don't think he's going to be the full-time head coach. But if we're being honest, and we're talking here strictly about coaching, we're not talking about some of the outside noise, I think Joel Quenneville has got to jump to the top of the list as coaches that could take this gig. He's a proven coach. He's won Stanley Cups, and if you want to jumpstart that team, that'll certainly do it. But again, we've talked about some of the baggage that comes with that.
Yeah.
But I would think that he's got to be on the top of the list right now. I mean, this is not even an hour old.
Yeah, and you see some teams that may be looking for a coach. What about the Pittsburgh Penguins? Because right now they're sitting at 7-10-3, near the basement of the Metropolitan Division with 20 games played. I mean, they're literally almost in last place. You got the last gasp of the Crosby, Malkin, Letang era. Will Mike Sullivan, will he be on the hot seat, or probably is on the hot seat right now? Will he be the next one to go? Could you see Jim Montgomery going to Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I think you absolutely could. I think Mike Sullivan is a great coach. I think that there were rumors in the offseason, I believe it was in the offseason, that New Jersey was interested in Mike Sullivan if they parted ways. So I think he's going to be a hot commodity, although he's been behind the bench for a while there, and maybe it's time for a new voice there as well. I think you hit it right on the head when you said it is a results-oriented business. And, Jim Montgomery, Jack Adams Award winner, had an incredible, I believe it was the best regular season in NHL history, and he's out today.
Yeah. And you look out in the West, we're talking about 5 regulation wins by the Boston Bruins. Other teams that have 5 or less regulation wins, the St. Louis Blues, Nashville Predators, Chicago Blackhawks, and the San Jose Sharks. So that's probably what they were looking at as well. But you know what? The Chicago Blackhawks, Taylor Hall being benched essentially, or healthy scratch, whatever you want to call it. What are your thoughts on that, Bruce? I mean, was there a communication? Like, what's that story all about?
Well, he said that they gave him a game to reset. And to Taylor Hall's credit, he said all the right things. He said that, it helped him kind of get a different perspective on the game, sitting out of one game. I think he's expected to play tonight. I believe it's tonight. But, it sounds like maybe... And Luke Richardson, the coach of the Blackhawks, actually said that part of this is on me. Maybe I didn't communicate my expectations as well. So hopefully they're just giving him a game to maybe sit him down and let him know that, hey, listen, everybody needs to be accountable. Nobody really expected the Chicago Blackhawks to be a great team this year. But, there's expectations for everybody, especially, and Taylor Hall should know that, former Hart Trophy winner with the Devils. Yeah. So we'll see how he responds. I mean, a lot of times a benching like that can set a veteran off on a tear, have point per game, and that would certainly help that team.
Yeah, and we have some new listeners and viewers tuning in the YouTube Live. Dino Fives' new theme podcast. Thanks, Sam. Yes, this is At the Point. We're talking NHL hockey, a little bit different on the Let's Go Devils podcast network, but myself and Bruce Zeman talking about, which teams need a little bit of a jump start. And switching gears right now, Bruce, let's talk about the Reeves suspension. I want to know what you're thinking about that.
I think the suspension was really based on his reputation. He's been suspended twice before. I watched this hit probably 20 or 30 times. And I don't think that he did it with any nasty intentions, because if we're being honest, and I always try to be honest, I'm talking now as an analyst, not as a fan. When Darnell Nurse came around the back of that net, he had his head down. And what I think is that Reeves was trying to, give him a pretty good pop, and he missed. And instead of hitting him in the chest, I think he hit him in the button, and you got to pay for that. I don't think it was intentional, but I think a lot of this is on reputation. A little surprised by the 5 games, but not surprised that he got a match penalty and he was sitting. But he forfeited $35,000 for that hit, and he's going to be out for a couple games.
Yeah, and you know what? It's the recurring theme with the league. They're trying to protect the players, is what they're saying. But here's the problem. And I'll use a pun here. I'm at the point right now where it's mind-boggling the league's suspensions under George Parros and, throughout the last 3 or 4 years where, okay, this gets 5 games, but something more vicious gets 1 game, but it's the same type of, player with the reputation. Like, it's never consistent. There's never a baseline. I understand that you can't compare apples and oranges, that each situation may be different, but I don't know. Again, if you're going to say 5 games, I would just want it to be consistent throughout the league. Because, you know how Oiler fans and Maple Leafs fans, there's always a bias against us, whatever. Because I always thought that. Because there have been suspensions in the past, or non-suspensions, like, I don't know, Matt Rempe that used to get away with everything. It took something really vicious before the league said, okay, we'll give you 2 games? Big whoop. That's the point I'm trying to make.
I slowed this down. I have a program on my computer that allows me to slow things down frame by frame. And like I said, I watched this probably 20 or 30 times. And every time I watch it, like I was looking for Reeves to look up at, if he was going to try to drill him in the melon, and I just never saw that. I think that he went to hit him in the chest and he missed. And, when you miss and you hurt somebody, you're going to get suspended. It's just, That's the way it is. I think he's played almost 900 games in this league, 893 games or something like that. He's been suspended twice. So I think part of this is reputation. I also think part of it is how bad it looked. Because if you look at it, let me just say this too, and I think this is important to remember, that you're looking at this at a slow speed. Like I'm looking at this on my computer frame by frame by frame. This is going on with people skating, 15 miles an hour and 2 big bodies hitting each other. So it's a lot easier for us to say, oh my, this happened. And, I just, it doesn't surprise me that he got 5 games, but I think there were players that have played in this league that have done things intentionally. I just don't think that this was the case in this instance. And again, listen, if you've played the game, regardless of your position, you also have to keep your head up. I mean, Don Cherry had a really good on his podcast. He had thoughts on this. He didn't even think it was a penalty.
Wow.
Or if he did, he thought it was a minor penalty. I mean, Grapes, that's another era.
Yeah, you got to be in context of which generation this game was officiated. I think the problem with instant replay and the video, it is a great tool, don't get me wrong. It's just when we do it frame by frame, like you were describing, it's almost like optical illusions happen when you're trying to, figure out what is the proper call, what is the proper, punishment. Oftentimes I think we overanalyze. You have to take the human element of the game when you're going to issue these type of suspensions. You got to take it in real time, and you have to take it in the slow-mo, what actually happened, and not so rely everything on that frame by frame, because you see a lot of things through that frame by frame, but at the same time, you 15 miles per hour skating, 2 big bodies, and you got a split second to make a decision, and if you miss, suddenly you're out 5 games. It's something to think about the next time you put on a hit on a player. At the same time, even though there's no intention there and all that, the league has an obligation to protect the players as well. It's just one of those things. I'm not going to fault anybody. The only thing I want, Bruce, is if you're going to deal out, put out punishment, it's got to be consistent across the board. It can't be like, because we could probably find another vicious hit 5 games later that looked intentional. It was headhunting, and it's a player with a bad reputation, and they get 1 game for whatever reason, and nobody can ever explain that.
Well, we saw some hits on some of the Devils forwards last year that you were wondering, what just happened here? There's no suspension, or I can't remember the game or the player right now, but the one hit on Nico Hischier last year when he was like
Jonas Siegenthaler, well, Matt Rempe. And then on top of that, Matt Rempe didn't answer the bell when McDermott was looking to kill him. And then they had to settle it on another game. So it couldn't be settled there, which, again, there's a written code in hockey that I still think exists. But then it extended, and then there was a line brawl, but somehow Curtis Lazar was able to get the first punch in that line brawl. So it's like, they get to stay. It's just all this stuff is just, again, just it bothers me.
Well, there's a lack of consistency in that. There really always has been. And hopefully Darnell Nurse is okay. I mean, I was reading something today that he was up and signing autographs, and that's a good thing. But I think Reeves, if we had him on the show, maybe we will sometime. I think he would say, listen, I went to hit him in the chest, I missed, and I'm gonna sit for a few games now.
Yeah, but I just want to see more consistency in the game. To be honest with you, and again, it's the league has to do what the league has to do. But sometimes, Gary Bettman used to say, fans think that there's a conspiracy theory that I'm favoring one team and I'm really not. It's like, yeah, but the inconsistency is the reason why fans think that way. It's nothing personal, but, sometimes you just shake your head on that. But, speaking of injury, Alexander Ovechkin, I believe, is day-to-day, leading the league in scoring. Am I correct on that? With 15 goals?
Well, he's got 15 goals, 10 assists, 25 points in 18 games. But in I guess, not so good news for the Capitals, he's now week to week with a lower leg injury. Yeah, wow. The team said that earlier today. They're going to have him evaluated with the team physicians tomorrow back in Washington. But that happened yesterday in that win against Utah, and Ovechkin has just been on a tear lately, and for Washington, they're in first place in the Metro right now, largely because of him.
Yeah, and that's definitely an X factor right there. That Alexander Ovechkin is going to be gone as he goes for that Wayne Gretzky record. Now, I know we're going a little off topic here. Do you really want to see him break that record?
I think it's a different era. I think when Gretzky played and Ovechkin played, I think it's a different era. I mean, it's a pretty significant record. Yeah, I think I'd like to see him break it. I mean, I've always kind of liked Alex Ovechkin. And, but, here's something I'll throw out to you. I mean, the Capitals are having a great season. They're 13-4-1, first in the Metro. But I've often wondered, is this like kind of a distraction to the team? I mean, I get your 28 goals or whatever it is, and then we can get back to, worrying about the team first.
Well, I think that's what he's trying to do. Because he's off to a hot start. He's 39 years old, going to be 40 soon, right? I don't want to see him break the record. And I know that's very unpopular. It's nothing personal. It's just when I think of the great one, and when I think of Wayne Gretzky, which was an impossible, who would have ever fathomed? Now, Ovechkin should have 1,000 goals right now if his rookie year was a year-long lockout. He gets drafted in 2004, first overall by the Washington Capitals, and that season's wiped out. His first season with the Washington Capitals, he had 51, 52 goals. So can you imagine if he had maybe, let's say 40 goals in that 2004-2005 season that never happened because of a year-long lockout, plus another work stoppage in 2012. Lost about 30 games, 40 games there. All these work stoppages. COVID was definitely a work stoppage. No fault to the league, no fault to Alexander Ovechkin. Lost maybe a season, if you think about it, because the season was kind of cut short there in 2020. And then 2021 was definitely cut short. Lost some time there. I mean, he should have the record right now.
Yeah, and here's something interesting. I was talking to another friend of mine earlier today. Think about this. Not only Ovechkin, but another player that would be in serious contention to break this record and potentially some other things is look at Jaromir Jagr.
Yes.
If he hadn't been in Europe for, I think it was 5 or 6 years, I mean, he would be threatening this record as well. I don't know. I think you're right, though. I think it's going to be kind of bittersweet. But to me, it's kind of a different era. I think the days when we're going to see players scoring, 215 points, I don't think you're going to see that again.
Well, first off, let's talk about the differences between Gretzky's era and Alexander Ovechkin's era. Now, remember, he came after that year-long NHL lockout. The rules changed. You took out the red line. You put a trapezoid behind the net. All sorts of gimmicks in there. But the red line, I'm not opposed to, because pretty much all of hockey doesn't have that red line. It was the NHL that had two line passing and all that kind of jazz back in the day, which Wayne Gretzky had to play in. He played in a much constricted era. Granted, back in the early 80s and late 80s, it was just an offensive league at the time, but goaltending eventually got better. The clutching and grabbing, the neutral zone trap of the 90s, a left wing lock, all that it's kind of slowed the game down. Gretzky, played in an era where there was a lot of fighting, although he had his protectors and like Marty McSorley or Semenko or whoever, you're right. It's a different era. Whereas I think Alexander Ovechkin benefited at the time. They called it the new NHL. He totally took advantage of that. Plus, the overtime is different. It's now 3-on-3. How many goals did he get 3-on-3? In that format versus what Wayne Gretzky had to go through. It's a different era. I just think, Vasilevsky. We were down in Tampa for the Devils Tampa game, which we'll talk Devils soon. 300 wins. But you talk about like Marty Brodeur was his 692 or whatever that total is. Half of his career was played in the tie era, which is very interesting to me. And, again, and Marty Brodeur lost, I think he had 4 work stoppages in his tenure. Back in, I believe in 92 when he was an emergency goalie, I think there was a player strike then. And then 95, that was a lockout. Then you had a year-long lockout in 2004, 2005. And then you had another lockout after the 2012 season. That's a 2 years worth of work stoppages.
Yeah, and considering how many games he played, that could be, potentially another 40 wins added to his total, potentially, if you look at that. But I think Marty's record is one that probably won't ever be broken, but who knows? I mean, we said the same thing about Gretzky's goal total.
Yeah, and you know what? I think the chances of Brodeur's record being broken is actually pretty good. It will be. For the very reason is Brodeur, half of his career was played in the salary cap era. So potentially you could have a Patrick Waugh scenario where, okay, your team's about to suck, and then now you go from the Montreal Canadiens to the Colorado Avalanche, which was a new startup team that was ready to go and win cups. So, free agency is a lot different than the Brodeur era. Plus with, the 3-on-3 and shootout and all that you can pad some wins. I mean, do the ties count for anything for Brodeur? I mean, he has a boatload of ties in his career. So, we shall see. But I think Brodeur's record can be broken. But the thing that will probably make it difficult is the game is so fast and furious right now that I don't think a butterfly goaltender can have that longevity like Brodeur had. You're going to have to be a hybrid if you're going to have any chance of saving the wear and tear on your body and have a 20-plus year career in order to do it.
And here's the reason I don't think it's going to be broken. First of all, because goaltenders tend to take longer to develop than a forward, for example. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that a player comes out. Let's say a goalie breaks into the league. Let's just say at 25. For the sake of argument, let's say that a goalie comes up at 25. Marty has 693 wins. All right? So you're going to have to play for 15 years and average almost 40 wins a year for those 15 years, which I don't know if is possible in today's NHL. Plus, I don't think with the big thing here to me, Sam, is the money. All right, let's use Jeremy Swayman for an example. All right, that huge contract he just signed. I don't think the Bruins are going to have him play 60, 70 games a year because of their investment. I mean, Marty was playing 72, 73 games. I don't think you're going to see that again. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think you're going to see that just because to me, there's also a financial part of this. I mean, are you going to play Jeremy Swayman in a meaningless game against the San Jose Sharks in March so he can get win number 40? I'm not sure that they're going to do that now.
Yeah. It's all about the cup.
It's also all about the money.
Yeah. And that's what I meant. It's all about the cup because playoff revenue is newfound money for any team. For any team, but, well, Bruce, let's talk Devils. Because we got a lot of Devils fans watching. We talked a lot about Bruins. We talked a lot about, the Caps. But the Devils, who are they? They're Jekyll and Hyde.
Well, that's the topic that I came up with for our show today because you have them playing some really, really good hockey, and then you have them playing some really not so good hockey, and their game in Tampa that you were at, that was not a good game for New Jersey.
It was not a good game. They were always in it, though. I will say, I'm trying to stick to the positives here. I'm stretching, but just let me stick to the positives a little bit. They were always in the game. Markstrom played out of his mind. He had that one amazing save that it was right in front of me. He snagged it out of the air. I thought that was a goal, but it wasn't. Those are the kind of the positives. The negatives, well, their offense, they were stopped by Tampa. Tampa has a solution. I mean, Tampa is a hot team. They ran into a hot team that beat the Winnipeg Jets. And coming off of 2 big wins in Florida, in their building, beating up on the Cats, the Lightning, to me, as long as John Cooper's there, they're an elite team. And their salary cap situation, not having Stamkos there, I mean, they had to cheat a little bit with the LTIR, playing that game. But right now they got a little flexibility that they haven't had. They didn't re-sign Palat, which is now the Devils' problem. But I think the Devils are a work in progress. I think Sheldon Keefe has done a above expectations at this point. But that inconsistency has been there for the last 5 years, even during their record-breaking season. It's a lot of ups and downs. It's a roller coaster ride with this team called the New Jersey Devils. I think at some point, the players are going to have to try to figure this thing out if they want to even really contend for the Stanley Cup.
Well, I think you're right. And I think one of the things that you mentioned earlier in the podcast, which relates a little bit to what we were talking about with the Bruins, is there's very, very high expectations for this team. I picked them last year to play Edmonton in the Stanley Cup final. I didn't have them winning, but I had them playing Edmonton. I was right about Edmonton. But this year, I mean, they've gotten the goaltending. They've gotten some of the other things that they needed, and I think there's much higher expectations. And I think in a league of this caliber, which is the best hockey league in the world, making that jump from being a team that's okay to a team that's a Stanley Cup contender, I think it's significant. I think for some of these players that came over from other teams where, and I'm not picking on anybody here, but if you look at Timo Meier, for example, he was on a Sharks team that's been terrible forever. I mean, really, I think since 2017, maybe. I could be wrong about that. But now coming here, I mean, listen, people expect them to go deep into the playoffs this year. I have them getting to the conference finals. And as you said earlier, this is a results-driven business. You're not in a market where they don't expect you to win here. I mean, the fans expect you to win. And that's one of the reasons I was so happy when the team brought in, Jacob Markstrom at the beginning of the year, because he wants to be here. He says he's ready for the pressure, so let's go. But I think that, you see the development of teams and the in the involvement, I mean, that was a crushing loss for the Edmonton Oilers last year in the Stanley Cup final. Just like the year before, Florida had a terrible ending. And, maybe New Jersey has to go through that whole evolution to get to where they need to go. But I think you're right. I think this team has got to figure out where they are. I think the coaching change absolutely helped. I think they held on to Lindy 1 year too late. And we'll see what happens. I mean, but this is a big year for this franchise.
A big turning point. Now, they have a different personnel. All right. You got Paul Cotter. You got some muscle there. Curtis Lazar came back. But Dylan, they re-signed McDermott. Pesci, was signed in the offseason. I have high hopes for the New Jersey Devils. I think there's potential there. It's just they got to get through this hump. They got to get the points right now, because down the stretch they're going to be fighting for a playoff spot. But get the points right now. But I think the key thing is, how are they going to develop as a team? How are they going to gel a team? Where they're going to be in February when you got a 2-week long break for the Four Nation series. It should be very interesting. But right now, I'm happy where the Devils are at. But I'm not saying that they're going to be a Stanley Cup contender yet. But I'm happy with the progress that Sheldon Keefe, is making improvements. But one thing I notice is they're having fun out there and they're playing for each other. Whereas, in the past few years, let's just say, when Nico got hit and Jack got hit, nobody did anything.
Well, that's a problem. And let's take a step back again to what we were talking about a moment ago, expectations. 2 years ago, when they had that record-breaking season, the most successful season in franchise history, there were no expectations. People thought they were going to be terrible that year. And they had this great season. They got by the Rangers, and then they didn't really have a good series against Carolina. But then going into, last year, they have a brutal season. And so, again, speaking as an analyst and not as a fan here, which is hard, if I'm being honest, because you want your team to do well all the time. I think a lot of people were wondering how good are they? Because they weren't sneaking up on anybody anymore. A lot of people, including myself, expected them to be really good last year. Yeah. And so now there was a lot of criticism of Tom Fitzgerald, and I think some of it rightly so. Not getting that goaltender, not improving the defense. I still think they need another grinding physical forward. But Tom Fitzgerald, as the GM, gave him the tools. And if we're being fair to Lindy Ruff did not have some of the tools that Sheldon Keefe has. He did not have Jacob Hall.
No,
right?
So
if we're being fair to Lindy Ruff, and I think you have to be, now he's got the tools. And so now it's up really to the players, as you alluded to a moment ago. It's up to the players to make that jump. And it's kind of, if you take a step back, to the Jim Montgomery thing that we were talking about earlier in the podcast, Jim Montgomery is not going to go out there with the game on his stick and not score. So I think there is a lot a coach can do, but I think I have very high expectations for this team this year, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Bruce. Well, it was fun talking to you.
Absolutely.
Today. Went in a little bit of overtime, but that's okay. We're going to drop the podcast on our podcast pages, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music Prime, Audible, and the iHeart app in about 20 minutes. But we'll be back on Thursday. I'll be at American Whiskey. I'm hoping to be. Hopefully there's no last-second changes. But American Whiskey for the Devils, they have a home game. I think they're playing Nashville, if I'm not mistaken, on Thursday. Do you know the schedule, Bruce, offhand?
I do not have it in front of me, and thanks to the magic of internet in Delaware, right now it says I have no link.
Really?
That's what it says, so I'm going to...
No, they're playing Carolina. I'm sorry. They're playing Carolina. My bad.
Right, Carolina.
Yeah, Carolina. So I get them mixed up sometimes. They're playing Carolina on Thursday. So we're going to have At the Point around 5 p.m. Eastern. At 6 p.m. Eastern, we'll have Game Day Live with Vinny Parisi and Shorts Guy. And tomorrow we will have the State of the Fan Address presented by pucksandpitchforks.com. Nick Villano and I will be talking Devils hockey. Thank you to everybody tuning in. Thank you to you, Bruce. Thank you to everybody. It's a new type of podcast here on the Let's Go Devils Podcast Network. Talking more NHL. Getting our points across, Bruce. We got them across today. Because I'm at the point right now where I'm just going to fight the refs. Yeah.
All I have to say, Sam, is shoot.
Yeah, I know. All right, till next time, let's go Devils.